very good morning to you, and you're welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Mark Gibson, and today we'll be talking about hedgerows. And just to remind you that the Signpost series is brought to you by Teagasc Connected in association with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network, and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. So I hope you've all had the opportunity to enjoy the fine weather and the beautiful Irish countryside during the holiday season. But today, as I said, we're going to be talking about hedgerows and the launch of Hedgerow Week. As we know, hedgerows are hugely important wildlife corridors in Ireland, and they connect isolated woodlands and help mammals, insects, birds and bats get from one part of the countryside to another. And there are many, many more benefits of hedgerows. So I'm delighted this morning to be joined by Minister Pippa Hackett, who's Minister of State at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. We also have Frances Quigley, who's a machinery specialist and co-organizer of Hedgerow Week. And our main speaker this morning is Dr. Catherine Keena, who's a countryside management specialist with Teagasc. And good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to this morning's webinar.
Good morning, Mark.
So, Minister, you're very welcome to the webinar once again, and you've very kindly agreed to officially launch Hedgerow Week for us in 2022. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Mark. Great to be here. And yeah, I think on the whole, people are enjoying the fine weather. I know some of us could do with maybe some rain, but yes, I'm sure it'll come.
It is an issue, all right, in parts of the country, all right. But look, we can't be complaining too much. So, Minister, I'll hand over to you for the official opening, and we will talk to you in a moment.
Thank you very much, Mark. And yeah, look, it is a pleasure to be here at the start of Hedgerow Week. In fact, yesterday I was out with my 11-year-old son. We were picking some blackberries in a hedge of one of our own. And it was just nice, you know, it's lovely to be able to do that and to see the fruits up close. And of course, they taste really nice too. So yeah, an apt time, obviously, for Hedgerow Week. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to launch Teagasc's Hedgerow Week. And I think at last year's event and in previous years, we've seen a really packed schedule. And again, this will be no exception. And we have, I think there's some standouts this week. Well, there are going to be exhibits on hedgerows this coming week at the Iverk Show in Pilltown, at the Johnstown Castle Open Day, and demonstrations at Gertrude College. And certainly the novel idea of a walk and talk in association with Nor Vision and the Heritage Council on Hedgerows of Kilkenny City should also prove very interesting. So I urge everyone to check out the events and get to as many as you can this week. It's certainly with thanks to events like Hedgerow Week that progress has been made on raising awareness of the value of our hedges and the importance of the appropriate maintenance. and I know why we do see all this sort of, particularly on social media, you know, bad examples of hedgerow management. There's also a lot of good out there. And I, for one, can speak to having traveled around the country this last year or so. I think of existing hedges, I think they're looking bigger. I think they're looking taller. You can even see in the spring where maybe farmers have left a little bit more, 6 or 8 inches on the previous year's growth. So I think that's all progress. I think the importance of hedges is filtering through. And I think that's really, really positive, and we can just keep building on that. And thanks to everyone who engages with that. We're fortunate in Ireland to have quite a lot of hedges, and we have lost some over the years, but you know, compared to other countries, we're not too bad. We've an estimated hedgerow length about 700,000 kilometres, and hedges are estimated to cover about 4% of the Irish landscape. So that's, you know, quite significant, but still there's more we can do, and certainly more, you're going to hear from Catherine in terms of, and Frances in terms of hedgerow management later on and the best practices to involve. Obviously, we know that hedges perform multiple functions, not only as boundaries and stock-proof fencing. They are corridors for wildlife. They are places for wildlife to breed, to live, for birds to nest, and certainly for wildlife to access food, particularly from this time of the year onwards. So those flowers we saw in the spring will have turned into some sort of fruit or berry now. And I actually walked by a hedge, it wasn't my own land, actually, a neighbour's farm yesterday, and here was a crab apple tree with crab apples, almost ripe, alongside sloes, which obviously are the berries of the blackthorn. So just hand in hand in a little piece like that, you could see how managing our hedges and maybe leaving some of the trees and plants and shrubs to flower and fruit is invaluable. We also, I suppose, are trying to further understand the carbon content of our hedges. And I know work is undergoing between the EPA and Teagasc in that regard, but projects such as Farm Carbon are continuing to ensure that we increase awareness, through carbon and through sharing of knowledge around what our hedges are good for. So I think also in Ireland, we're very fortunate to have the All Ireland Pollinator Plan in place since 2015. And the first plan actually produced guidelines for farmland actions to help pollinators. Again, this is a hugely valuable source of information, and anyone on here who's interested, do just check it out. A lot of the advice is relatively simple, straightforward to adopt, but sometimes we just need to nudge that information in the right direction. My own Department of Agriculture supports a farmland pollinator officer who is working to further engage with farmers. And look, the many benefits of hedgerows, such as providing food and shelter, are really only possible, and I suppose this is one of the bottom lines, are only possible if the hedge has been maintained in an appropriate manner over a number of years, of course, and allowed to bloom and fruit during the year. This importance of hedgerows as a farmland habitat has been recognised, through environmental schemes since 1994, when the first REP scheme was devised, and since then we've tried to advance and build on those through the different REPs schemes, through AEOS and through the outgoing GLOS scheme. And these schemes have facilitated the planting of about 11,000 kilometres of new hedges and the rejuvenation of about 6,000. That is significant, but in a 700,000 kilometre length of hedge across the country, there is certainly more scope to do more. And certainly I'd like to think under the new agri-environmental scheme acres, we will be able to continue and build on those achievements. And certainly hedges and trees feature, I think, to a great extent in the acres measures. And I hope farmers will avail of those and undertake those. So Hedgerow Week was really about best practice hedge cutting. And again, we'll build on progress we've already achieved. So really, I suppose, look, the 1st of September is the date at which hedges can be cut. But I suppose rather than just starting straight away on the 1st of September, I would encourage, where possible, that farmers cut their hedges as late as possible in the winter. Certainly if there's berries on your hedges, to allow birds to avail of those much needed food sources later on this autumn and throughout the winter. Look, I accept in certain circumstances this isn't going to be possible, but maybe more sympathetic cutting, or maybe leaving a few more parts of hedges uncut might facilitate that also. But ultimately, we see our hedges now as not just those boundaries and stock-proof pieces, but as those essential habitats. And we know our numbers of wildlife are in decline, or some bird species, insects, everything really that could rely on a hedge is challenged when we remove those vital fruits. So I think, actions like these and how we manage our hedges can have a significant positive impact on our biodiversity. Obviously, farm safety is a huge, important issue in relation to utilising hedge cutting equipment. And farmers should always use a well-trained operator with appropriately maintained equipment to carry out hedgerow maintenance. So before I finish, I would like to mention that there are a number of resources available to guide hedgerow management. In recent years, certainly Teagasc have produced some very good material around hedgerow management. And also the Farming for Nature initiative have produced a best practice guideline around hedges and hedgerow road management. And there are other publications indeed through the Irish or the Ireland's pollinator plan. So, you know, reach out, have a look at those and maybe try and adopt some of the advice. So finally, to conclude, we prepare for and reflect on our approach to hedgerow maintenance over the coming season. Remember that it is through best practice hedge cutting that our hedgerows can flourish and our appreciation for hedgerows will continue. So I hope you enjoy this morning's seminar, and I'm going to pass you back to Mark, and I'm sure you will very much enjoy what Francis and Catherine have to say as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think it really underlines the importance of hedgerows, the fact that we have a minister here this morning talking about Hedgerow Week and the importance. And you have a great knowledge of hedgerows yourself. You're farming, I know, in County Offaly, if I'm not mistaken. And
yeah.
So it is a really important part of our countryside, and my goodness, I'm looking at Francis's and Catherine's backgrounds there. Can you imagine that landscape without hedgerows? You know, it is such an important part of our culture as well. So Minister, thank you again for coming along this morning, and we appreciate your support for all of the initiatives that we're running. And we will, I'm sure, have you or see you again here on the Signpost webinar in not too distant future, hopefully.
Indeed, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So we're going to move swiftly onwards now to our main presentation this morning. So Catherine, you're going to be talking to us about the different types of hedgerows, the acres hedge actions, and also giving us an outline of what's coming up next week for Hedgerow Week. So can you share your screen with us there, Catherine? So really packed lineup for next week. So I know Francis is going to talk to us more about that at the end of your presentation. So Catherine, please, the floor is yours. If people want to send through questions, just a reminder to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And please do send us your questions. This is what these events are about, is giving you the opportunity to put questions to the experts. So please do, any questions or comments that you might have, include them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So Catherine, thanks very much again, and we'll hand straight over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I've been talking about hedges for a long time, so I'm going to give some simple messages today. Hopefully everyone will take away 3 simple messages. Best practice management for our 2 hedge types. So the title gives the hint to what I'm going to talk about. 2 types of hedges. If we could clarify that, it would help a lot, I think, to move forward. Mention some of the acres hedge actions, which advisors and farmers are now mulling over and will be dealing with in early autumn, and the Hedgerow Week events. So I'm taking a leaf out of Owen Carton from the Cumber Uplands Communities, our ex-colleague's book, in giving you the 3 messages at the beginning rather than the end, or as well as the end. So the 3 things I would love if you went away with today is to know the 2 types of hedges and their specific but very different management. And in summary, it's don't top escaped hedges and don't let topped hedges escape. So I'll come on to that. When planting hedges, which a lot of people will be doing in acres, decide which type you want before you start. So we're back to the 2 types of hedges. And another acres action is coppicing, and it can be very good or very bad. And my plea today is to coppice upside down tallish brush hedges rather than escaped hedges. So back to our 2 hedge types. This picture has both of them. If you can see the one, now it runs right along the back, is what I call the escaped hedge. And the one running at perpendicular to it is the topped hedge, although it is you can see the other one in the background. So 2 totally different animals in my view. The escaped hedge has never been topped. Some people call it a tree line, a linear woodland. I suppose this brings me to the history of our hedges. So apart from the townland boundaries, which were planted maybe 2,000 years ago, most of the Irish hedges were planted only 200 years ago under law. And it was really a management tool so that cattle could be kept in or out of in fields, out of crops. It allowed management. It was the beginning of the productive agriculture. So, and it was before wire. So it was extremely important to have hedges to manage them. So the hedges were planted, and the escaped hedges over the 200 years have never been topped. That's what I am talking about here. That's the escaped hedge, never been topped. They're tree lines, as I said. So that's them. Come in various different shapes and sizes. I could show you 20 pictures of different hedges. But as I said, these all, what they have in common is you can see there, these hedges over the 200 years have never been topped. And their huge biodiversity value is primarily in the canopy. You can see there the amount of flowers. They flower freely, they fruit freely. You have the willows and the hazels, you know, right through the year. It's a larder for bees, all the invertebrates, and the birds. And some of the birds, I've given examples at the bottom, actually nest up in the trees. So this is all about the canopy, primarily in the canopy. You can see from the previous picture, some of the, at the base, they have grown into trees, as a whitethorn, which is our predominant hedge species, no more than an oak tree wants to do. Its whole aim in life is to become a tree. And that's what the escaped hedges are. They've escaped management, they've escaped topping. Now, the best practice management, again, is to continue never to top them. Side trimming is always okay. You know, we don't want them, they would creep out and out into the field. And while a wide hedge is good, we don't necessarily want we still want the field. So side trimming, but never ever to top. The second type of hedge then is the topped hedge. And this is where deliberately the apical dominance has been managed. And the apical dominance is, as I said, where you plant a whitethorn whip or an oak tree, and its whole purpose in life is to grow up into being a tree with a canopy, with a full canopy and a single stem. And that's what those two thorn trees in that hedge have done. But the remainder of those from day one have been pruned and layered up, so that is so dense. I know the stakes in it there, but the wire has been taken down off that hedge, and I just say not a bull would go through it. It's cows in that field. So for years that has been layered up, and it's really important then that is kept topped, because otherwise it will escape. And for the value in this hedge is in, well, it has a bit of both. The huge value is in the dense space. You have primarily for the nesting birds, cover for small animals. You have the thrush and the blackbird eating the worms and the snails underneath it. But it can still have some of the canopy biodiversity, not as much as the other, as the escaped hedge, but with the occasional trees, including thorns, you will have flowers and fruit within that hedge. Topped hedges come in all shapes and sizes, some good, some bad. When we'll come on to the best practice management there. So I think you can guess which ones aren't going to score so high. When we want height and we want a good base in it in order to be able to keep topping it. So the best practice management of these topped hedges is to side trim from a wide base to a triangular profile. That allows the light to the base, and you have all the hedge growing rather than it being overshadowed by at the top. So the base of the hedge is kept healthy and growing. It is important to cut the growing point to prevent escaping. Leave the peak as high as possible. Now the research has shown that below 1.5 is very bad. There are no birds nesting in it because they need cover above and below. So at least 1.5 above the ground level, and that can include the bank. If you can remember 2 pictures ago there was a little fringe on top of a bank, and that does not qualify as the 1.5 meters. But as high as possible. Again, a variety is good on a farm. As high as what the limit on the height is whatever the hedge cutter can trim, can nip off the apical dominance there, and it should only be nipping the top as a triangular point rather than a flat top. And that is a superb hedge that will keep healthy for years. And because there's a whole base there, you can see the amount of growth that's supporting that where we're cutting the top, as opposed to some of the others we'll show. Retain occasional thorn saplings and allow to mature into flowering and fruiting trees. And my preference is to cut little and often, and I'll explain that better perhaps in the next slide. This is typical if you're looking out on your farm and say, this is what I have, and it's nice and neat and tidy, and that would be we have a problem with neat and tidy, but this is whitethorn hedges, but there are no flowers in this hedge. There will be no fruit in the hedge this autumn, and it is not good for biodiversity, and it's not good for carbon, because for carbon, again, the results coming out from Lillian's work shows, the bigger and denser, the better. So no flowers, no fruit, not good. Okay, so the overall plan, my vision for every farm is to have both types of hedges. And I think perhaps I haven't talked enough about the escaped hedges in the past, because we're so concentrated on trying to get the cutting of the others right. But they do face a threat. They face a threat of being removed because they're seen as not useless from a stock-proof point of view. They also face, the biggest threat they face when farmers take over a farm is that they are cut at kind of 2, 3, 4, 5 foot high. And that then turns them into the upside down toilet brush hedge. But so the overall plan is, as long as you have some escaped hedges on the farm, you follow best practice management for both the topped and escaped, which means that you have some flowering and fruiting trees in the other hedges. And then that keeps, we have both types. The elephant in the room can be the quantity. There's not much point in talking about quality and hedgerow management if you have 100-acre fields that have no hedges. So we must keep remembering the quantity there. And the back of the envelope that I find useful, and I think advisors do, is literally the total size of the farming platform divided by the number of fields. And I'm talking about fields surrounded by biodiverse boundaries, and to work on improving that over time, but at least under 5 hectares. Okay, so moving on to the acres actions and where they fit in with the hedges. So we have 3: coppicing, laying and planting. So this follows on then, okay, coppicing first, just to run through the facts. The minimum of 10 meters, maximum this time around of only 400 meters. I think that reflects the concern about the quality of the work done. So we really need to get this right this time. There's a nice payment for it, $287 per meter per year for 5 years. So a lot of people will take this up. So it's critical that appropriate hedges are chosen. And this is what today is about. My biggest problem is it is very difficult to see the hedge structure until the winter. The only time I would look at hedges for coppicing would be December, January, when there's no leaves there. Everything looks good at the moment. And that is a concern, because sometimes I know an awful lot of the topped hedges are stumps with fringes on them, and they're not going to support growth. But they put on a show during the summer, and it can be problems. I know way back in the past there was problems if we put something like that in and it was misunderstood. Somebody thought, oh, you're just trying to get easy money, and it was questioned. And I think we all need to understand there's a lot of the topped hedges could do with being brought back to the ground. Best practice coppicing is critical to improve rather than destroy biodiversity and reduce carbon. And old wire, a really serious warning here, old wire embedded in hedges must be removed before coppicing. So the danger's there, people have been killed. But apart from that, it's the amount of work. So be very careful putting in a hedge for coppicing and then realizing, oh my God, that's a huge job, before the contractor will come to touch it. So 3 examples of which hedge should we coppice. This one could be done. I think it's far too valuable for biodiversity and carbon to coppice. I would fence off both sides and allow natural regeneration of shrubs and ground flora. even where a hedge is gappy, don't forget there's other biodiversity between that. There's carbon in banks. So when I see a kind of a broken down hedge, I don't always see, oh, I must do something with it. I would far prefer to put my new hedge in a different place and leave when we think about it, 200 years old, their archaeological features, they have a thread from 200 years ago. The less interference with these, the better, other than to fence off both sides and then natural, vegetation will come. You wouldn't know what kind of flowers and shrubs will come up. Okay, again, this one, even worse. There's certainly too few shrubs here for successful regeneration. Too valuable for biodiversity and carbon to coppice, in my view. I would fence off both sides and allow natural regeneration. It's too big a job. It just is not worth it. Okay, so the one I would coppice is one, and this upside down tallish brush hedge, because it is of low biodiversity and carbon value at the moment. It's about to die on its feet. Because if you keep, now that one may not look too bad there, but you saw other examples there where being cut to the same point every year, only supported by a stump, is where our hedges are dying out. The thorn shrubs will rejuvenate well when cut, because it's thorns. That's the next point. There's no point in coppicing ash or other species. We really are talking about thorn species: blackthorn, whitethorn, holly. Holly generally doesn't need to, neither does blackthorn too much. It tends to grow at the base. We're primarily looking for a whitethorn hedge that has enough thorn stems, approximately one every metre. So implanting is not necessary, because that's a nightmare of a job and is seldom successful in my view. So that's the one I would love to see coppiced. There's plenty of them out there, whether we can see them before the winter, but I think you get the idea.
So Catherine, even with the wider than a metre gap there, you're still saying that probably implanting isn't going to be that successful? It's
very, very difficult. You're going into a dry soil, you're into thorn sickness, this like apple sickness where the old tree doesn't want the new one to grow. I don't know where the science is on that, but certainly from a drought and from even keeping weeds down, there is no comparison to putting a whip in there compared to what we're going to show with the new planting, which never fails in my experience.
What about a blackthorn? Would that
blackthorn or holly is better, but my point is, there are enough hedges out there which need coppicing, which will not need infilling. It will be a superb hedge that will not need a wire fence, because a half hedge is no good, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But you can do anything. I'm given very simple rules, Mark, and it's a good point. But this is an excellent job. You can see here, it was an appropriate hedge that was chosen. You can see the one in the background was similar to that. So and you can see it was cut at ground level, clean sloping cuts, sufficient stems, so no infilling was required. So that is a guaranteed success. That will take off and the weeds won't even cause a problem. And then you layer it up again, then up to whatever. So that's the ones. Why not go for the ones that are going to be a success, rather than, this is what happened in the past, the worst hedge was picked. And kind of going back to what you're saying, Mark, we could put one in there, but everything was wrong here. It was cut too high. There was no infilling done, but I still would say I would not recommend the infilling there to grow in such hedges. But in that case, that was probably a tall escaped hedge, and that was destroyed, and we have no result. So that's what I'm warning against. We do not want to see this. It must be cut at ground level, and that is still not a hedge I would have picked for coppicing. Hedge laying, I won't say as much about this. It's an absolute beautiful skill, same amount of meters, payment $5.47 per metre per year for 5 years. So it's more money, a lot more labour. Critical again that appropriate hedges are chosen. For this now you need tall hedges. So you are talking about the escaped hedges, but this is a hand job that, in general, people who do this do it very well, and, will make it work. It's very difficult to see the hedge structure until winter. So if you need an expert looking at it. Best practice laying is highly skilled work, and is fantastic. But the huge concern here is that diggers and heavy machinery have been used in the past, and that is absolutely not acceptable. So again, just a couple of pictures of the skill there. I won't go into it in detail today. I'll keep moving, but you get the picture. It's coppicing, but not going the full way and laying it over. Some amazing skill shown there. And again, the bottom picture was just to show that he was leaving one of those as a thorn tree. I think that's very important. As he was laying around it, but you're going to leave that as a white thorn tree to stand proud and produce the berries. Look, fantastic job, but I would be worried about it being done right. And then we are on to the planting. So again, now it was fantastic here. Now we've up to 750 meters gone up since last. The only slight concern is 750 meters is a lot. Unfortunately, the way the schemes work, this all has to be done in the 1 year. It's not ideal, but we have to work with it. But it's a lot of work to manage. A lot of people plant hedges without thought of the future. So again, the payment there, $5.29 per meter per year for 5 years. On the plants, 5 plants per meter, slightly different than before, double staggered row. At least 3 species, with no one making up more than 70% of the total, must be Irish origin or provenance and purchased from registered producers. That's all okay. But again, critical, and my plea to everybody is, if you're thinking of planting, decide whether escaped or topped, because it's a totally different hedge, and manage accordingly. Planting a new escaped hedge, choose any mix of tree or hedgerow or tree species, because they're not going to ever be topped. You don't prune them after planting, therefore you don't use the compostable film. It's kind of down to hand weeding. It's not as critical because they're going to go into a single stem anyway, and it's fine as long as they are never topped. The big concern with this is a lot of people say to me, no, I won't bother pruning or plastic or anything like that. And then when it comes to above the wire at 5 foot high, they say, oh yeah, I'll cut it then, not realizing they're already turning it into an upside down toilet fruit hedge. It will take a while to come to a doomsday, but it's really, really wrong for our new hedges. If it's an escaped hedge, lovely, I love those, but as long as you're never going to top it. If you want a topped hedge, and in general, people who plant hedges tend to want this one, you must choose hedgerow species that tolerate trimming. You must plan for an occasional whitethorn tree and include a small number of additional tree species. But I always put the thorn first, because people always tend to, back in the day they would have left the ash, but nobody has been thinking of the whitethorn as a tree. And we're moving on this now with the derogation rules, has done fantastic work. Protect these trees with a tree guard. These are the single individual trees, and partly so they will never be pruned, because the hedge will kind of catch up and you might forget. It's difficult to see where they are the next year. It also keeps them, it just protects them, and it's a really good marker. So those trees then are left forever. I would tend to put one every 10 meters in a new hedge to give you an option. You can always cut it out, but it's nice to have it straight from the beginning. In the derogation and in all topped hedges, we would love to see existing thorns being left grow up. Go back to that picture, that very sparse picture I saw. Within a year, that could be improved by leaving a clump of thorns grow up. And the reason, when I ask people, advisors or farmers, they often say, sure, there was no thorn, there was no tree in the hedge, not realizing the whole hedge was whitethorn, but because it has never flowered, they don't realize that's what it is. Okay, the rest of the hedge then, other than our individual specimen trees, which is a whitethorn and others, we prune all the plants other than those after planting. Push compostable film or plastic we've used in the past, but now we're moving on to compostable film over the pruned stumps, and prune each year to get layered growth. Again, somebody said that to me lately, and I thought it was a lovely explanation. I used to talk about inching it up, but this is an example of that's on its second cut there. The more you cut, the fantastic thing about whitethorn is that it thrives on cutting, but only out a bit every year. Okay, and that's the compostable film working perfectly. Again, this is our demo of such a and we're doing this. We did about 10 examples on Chagas farms this year, and the plan is to do an adjoining 10 meters each year, because seeing is believing, and it's only when you see that result the year afterwards, you know, because that's kind of frightening to people to do that. They have to take me for granted, but once they've seen the result, they will never forget it. So again, that picture there now on the bottom left, that's going to be cut back like the one on the top right. So every time, wherever you cut, it will multiply. Okay, and again, so in summary, you know,
just one question there, just when we were talking about the film,
yes.
What about using sheep's wool as a weed barrier when planting a new hedge rather than using plastic or other?
Good question, Francis. Anything that keeps the light out. So people can use cardboard or carpet or whatever, you know, mulch. But in my experience, there is none of those are available to every farm in the country. But anything that keeps the light out, and provided it's kept out all the time, if you know what I mean, because sometimes people throw down a bit of bark mulch or whatever, but unless you keep it layered up, or sawdust, you know, so, but anything that keeps the light out, that's all we're doing. But the only one I've ever found to work on every situation is the plastic now combustible film. So just to summarize then, with all this fantastic work and hopefully education on the benefits of the hedges for biodiversity and carbon and water and shelter and all the different flora and fauna, but only if we have a hedgerow plan on our farm. And again, we need both types of hedges on every farm. You can see clearly there, the one on the left is the escaped hedge, possibly with a thin base. But the one on the right then has the topped hedge containing individual thorn or crabapple or whatever other trees. And again, just to summarize, we're going into Chagas Hedgerow week, and our main message is our the best practice. So I just run through the dates. Saturday, tomorrow in Iberk Show in Kilkenny, we'll have a hedgerow stand. Monday, we will be announcing the winner of a new farm hedge competition with a roll of compostable film sponsored by Maze Tech. Our Johnstown Castle Open Day will have a big hedgerow exhibit both on the table and in reality. The talk in the Nor Vision and in association with the Heritage Council, walk and talk for the hedgerows of Kilkenny City. So we're not leaving the city, the country and city, we're covering all. Thursday the 1st at 11 o'clock in Gurchin Agricultural College, demonstrations there. And next Friday, actually quite exciting for me, because there is not much of an international dimension because we're so much on our own here with the hedges, but there is some work going on in France, and we'll have an international dimension there. So again, the whole purpose of the week is for you to go away knowing, recognizing the two types of hedges and their specific management. Don't top escaped hedges and don't let topped hedges escape. When planting, decide which type you want before you start, and coppice upside down Irish bush hedges rather than escaped. Garmagi.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Excellent run through. Again, I know it was difficult to go into any specific detail on the actual planting side of things, but really good advice there on the management side of things. And looking forward to next week's presentation from Françoise Borel from France, who's going to be speaking about the network element of hedgerows. Catherine, just a question for you there in relation to the wilder hedges. I know there's a view out there that by some farmers that hedgerows should be just left to their own devices and not interfered with. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think, and that hasn't helped us. This is where the confusion arises. For the escaped hedges, that's fine. You know, if you side trim, that's fine. Or if you don't side trim, that's fine. But for the other hedge, it's the wrong thing to say. And I think it's providing we have some escaped hedges and we manage that has caused us huge problems for contractors, Mark, that, you know, that it's kind of, we should not touch anything. No, that's not right. That is not right. We need a balance of all types and the right management. But that does not excuse poor management, okay? Poor hedge cutting.
I was looking at some of the images you had there of the escaped hedges, the mature escaped hedges. I was just thinking, would that grassland margin option in acres be suitable for that? It would be ideal, wouldn't it?
Oh, Mark, I foresee a time when there'll be a margin around every hedge and every watercourse. because it's another habitat that's missing off farms. That's another story in its own right, but absolutely the margin along by that would be super, and that's another fantastic option and well-paying option in acres.
Yeah. You mentioned about the requirement under acres to have your hedges planted in the first year. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
Maybe not. I think maybe not the first year, but all kind of has to happen. I think at the end of 2024, I looked at the coppicing. I forget now. Did I take it wrong for the planting? But it's not like ideally you'd love to do a bit every year over the 5 years, and that certainly isn't allowed.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about the pressure that might put on
absolutely
the of new stock and
everything. It causes huge problems. Yeah.
You mentioned contractors, and Francis, I know that you're working on an event for next week specifically designed for contractors. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I suppose, one of the key people, when it comes to cutting hedges is the contractor, and getting the message through to the contractor is something that we've been working on, I suppose, for a number of years. But it is a challenge. In a lot of cases, the farmer will assume the contractor knows how the hedge is going to be cut, and maybe the contractor assumes that he's doing the right thing too by trimming tight and keeping a nice neat hedge, thinking that's what the farmer wants. And it's something we've been always trying to encourage them to, engage that a little bit more with each other to discuss what it is they actually want and the results. But I suppose, the events, the likes of the event in Gorteen is critical, and that's where, we would really be encouraging as many contractors as possible, as well as farmers, to come along to that event. It will be, it is the 1st of September, so we will be doing a live demonstration there. We will have the machines working there. We're going to have a saw and mulcher hedge on site for the first time at any of these events. So we'll be shown how to use those, and like Catherine showed in her presentation there, one of the challenges is that when people use those saw heads, they actually tend to maybe use them too high, and they're not going low enough. But again, as Catherine mentioned already, that might be for other reasons. It might be because there's wire and things in the hedge, and the contractor is avoiding that. So it's to get that message and to make sure everybody's clear that it's getting as that those tools are being used correctly to get the best results. So it's on the 1st. It's in Gorteen College in Roscrea. It's starting at 11 a.m. We'll also be demonstrating a standard hedge cutter, working on a topped hedge, and we'll be emphasising the importance of leaving that single thorn in various points along the hedge. And the other thing that we'll be demonstrating is the use of the compostable film. So there is a section of newly planted hedge. Well, it's actually three years old. So even though we're encouraging people to use the compostable film when they're planting first day, it is actually possible to use it when you go back to do the pruning again. So even if you have your hedge in already, some people think, oh, I'm too late now, I should have done it first. There is an opportunity to use it when you're going back pruning. So again, I'd just like to thank all the staff in Gorteen for their help in hosting and organising the event. And we look forward to as many people as possible coming along on the day to get the message and see it in action.
Great. Thanks, Francis. It is. I have seen a number of farmers experimenting with the sheep's wool. In one way, it is sad to see that sheep's wool has such a low value that it is being used for that. But it will be interesting to see just how people are getting on with that. It might be interesting just to even an experiment for ourselves to conduct, just to see how well that comes through. And it's just worth also highlighting the event that's taking place next Tuesday in Johnstown Castle. This is in a major open day for the Environment Research Centre there, Farming for a Better Future. And there's going to be demonstrations around grass clover, multi-species swards, fertilizer and slurry technologies, of course, biodiversity and water quality, dairy and dairy beef systems, and of course the wider signpost program as well, and what's happening there. So and machinery demonstrations will be also conducted. So it's well worth getting along to that event. There is a registration page for that, and you can just go to the Teagasc website for that. Francis, some really good questions coming through on our Q&A tab there. If you wouldn't mind going through them for us. I think it'll be...
Yeah, I suppose the sum there just on the escaped hedges, Catherine, questions there just around the planting, and I suppose the reference to any species. Is there a special mix, Joe? Should the reference to what is traditional to that area or the landscape or the local conditions, soil conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy once it's native species and once it's, you know, what's available for the Irish provenance. That's really important. We touched on it before, and I'm very worried about people putting in species that are not not the native species. For example, the dog rose, you know, it's a simple one, but Rosa canina is the wild one, and then there's a Rosa rugosa, which is very aggressive. I'm not quite sure if it's considered invasive, but it's and you know, it's so easy to get that in a garden centre. So be very careful. You know, there's nothing wrong with your whole base is going to be white thorn and black thorn, I would expect anyway. But it's just where you have to be very careful not to put too many trees in the topped hedge. The escaped hedge, there's less pressure, you know, if you want to throw in your cherries and, you know, the ones that you don't want to top, because they'll never be topped.
Now, there was a question, I suppose, just around that again, is it, you know, in that escaped hedges, you know, will it become too dense if all the seedlings become trees, you know?
Well, that's why I agree. I would keep predominantly thorn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a question, I suppose, back to our membrane and that, can you spray off the ground before planting? And will there be demonstrations taking place around the country?
Absolutely no need to spray off. It's totally irrelevant when you're putting down the compostable film. Yeah, I've nothing against sprays, but it's just absolutely no need, because you're covering it down, and the wider the plastic, then compostable film, you know, you will yeah, no need. Ideally, turn over the ground. It's just a hell of a lot easier. Anybody who's ever done it will always do it. Get a digger or a mini digger or a plow or whatever to turn over the ground. It probably will grow a bit better, but it's more for the ease of planting.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here about yew hedges. Have they a role in agricultural hedges? Yew hedges.
Oh, sorry, yew. Not out in the fields, because it's the only one that's poisonous. I mean, they're beautiful yew hedges, you know, in places where there are no animals. But you know, it's just the one you wouldn't put out in the field.
There's a history question here for you, Catherine.
You might help me with that.
The townland markers were planted 2,000 years ago. They're just wondering, how did that happen?
How did that happen? I presume it was all to do with marking territory. It definitely was, you know, marking territory. Now, where the townlands fitted into that's, I don't know, but certainly it was territorial, keeping, I own this one and you're next door, and that's how much they owned at that stage. So
yeah, and that leads on maybe to a question there. Celine, in Scotland, a lot of their hedges are over trimmed because of peer pressure and what will the neighbour think, issues and good farming, and how do we tackle this? You know,
yeah, well, Francis, that's me and mine. Your question, like, the farmer thinks the contractor knows best, the contractor thinks the farmers know best, and they're both looking over their shoulder at the neighbour. And you know, and I often tell a story about elderly relatives of my own looking out at the hedges. I do have to bite my tongue, because it's all about how neat and tidy. But this is why it's really important this week, and that we engage farmers, contractors, and the general public, because it's the one habitat on a farm that I work with where, you know, we really do need everybody to understand, because everybody has a view, everybody thinks they know, and we just all need to be educated about hedges, so that we give positive signals to farmers to do the right thing. And again, county councils and roadsides, now safety can come into it, and safety first always, but sometimes it's not always for safety when things are done. But anyway, yeah, that's a great.
No, and Sorry, Cormac.
The pollinators initiative, I think, has been a great help from that perspective, where, you know, the mowed, what we would typically see as mowed margins along roadsides or community areas, people are now realizing this is really sanctuary for wildlife, and okay, it's not neat and tidy, and the human eye is probably drawn to those highly manicured gardens. But I mean, I think people are now starting to accept that, look, this is something we need to have in our around us.
There was a line in the original Rex book. Now, I was there at the very beginning of Rex, and I'd say it was Frank Mackin that wrote it, and it said the quest for neatness should not override ecological considerations. Mm-hmm. And, you know, had we heeded that 20 years ago, we would be in a better place. But so now is the time to understand that.
Yeah, no, it's a great principle for people to even adopt on their own farms, and just to see, right, okay, can we, are there areas that we don't need to have necessarily closely shaved? Sorry, Francis, lots
no,
more.
yeah, there is, and even on that one, I suppose the other thing was an awful lot of the brochures for the hedge cutters. You know, when you get those, they have this lovely picture of a nice new tractor and hedge cutter and a really tight trimmed hedge, and an awful lot of the pictures you see online or printed in the media are similar, and it's something myself and Catherine have been trying to encourage people to.
Francis, you have to work your magic with the machinery.
Look, in fairness,
but no, you're right. The short back and sides is the short back and sides has no fruit or no flowers, and that's the point. And you know, it's a lot of them need to grow up, and also the thorns, which I didn't really cover in my presentation, Francis, but you mentioned we're going to show that, because it's such a simple thing overnight, and the derogation has done good work, although I still think people don't quite understand what we mean. We just mean leaving an existing clump to grow up, a clump, because I say it's too hard to narrow down to one. That can happen later if necessary. Whereas it'll be crooked, but so what, the birds and the bees don't mind. But just an existing clump growing out of the top of that flat-topped hedge. But we don't want flat tops anyway. But again, going back to the point that it's very hard to talk about the triangular profile when you're talking about an upside-down Polish bush hedge or any version of it, because you're beginning with a stump, and it's very hard to get that shape until we bring it back to ground level.
There's a question there about training for our contractors, and I suppose again you mentioned how important they are. Like Joan is just wondering, is there training courses or training program available?
Well, and we did check with Pallaskenry, have offer that every year, and it has fallen into kind of not happening but we had a huge effort. Worked with Tom Murphy years ago, and we got it together with Tom Ryan. So it is there. I don't know, is that what we want, or do we need more days like we're having in Gurchin? I'll do anything to help. Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic that contractors, and I know they are engaging, Francis, through you, and they want to, because they want to do it right. They're being paid they'll do anything as they tell me. But we all need to be telling them, you know, on the same hymn sheet. And
we'd be hoping to do, or hoping to encourage more of the Gortine days, similar days throughout the rest of the season, maybe on some of the signpost farms. And that
yes, we're hoping to do during sustainability. I think that first question you said about demonstrations during Sustainability Week in October, we'll hope to repeat this within the regions.
Yeah, but that training course is available if we have the numbers to run it. So absolutely,
contact Pallaskenry.
Yeah. Is it possible to measure the amount of carbon sequestered by hedges?
That is what Lillian O'Sullivan and Farm Carbon is doing, and we're awaiting, and we'll have her on the signpost as soon as she's ready to give her final kind of results on that. We know they do sequester, and I think it goes without saying that the poor hedges I showed, you can take it, they're not good for carbon.
I suppose there's a question here, Teagasc booklet or more information. I suppose where the best place to go for further information?
The website, and we have built up a lot of resources now through the Hedgerow week even. So
on the Teagasc website, there's a lot of videos and that there as well that we keep up to date as well. Yeah.
I've just shared some links there for everybody on the chat there that they can log into, just on the Teagasc website for those resources. So those, if you go into the chat section there, you should be able to see them. But no, that's excellent. We have quite a few questions coming in around the training side of things. So that's something that we can discuss with contractors during next week's event as well. I know there is a desire there amongst contractors, so perhaps that's something we could roll out through the Connected program. So as we draw to a close, Catherine and Francis, is there anything else you'd like to add in relation to next week's events?
No, just to reiterate that the general public and farmers and families, anybody's welcome. As you said, the Johnstown Castle Open Day is going to be massive for everybody. Lots of things, but we'll be there at all those. And so all welcome, I suppose, Mark, is what I want to say. Great.
And next week's presentation, again, we'll be following in a similar theme with that presentation from Françoise Borel. And Catherine, could you tell us what Françoise will be speaking about?
Yeah, I heard her speak before, and I suppose it's the first time I ever heard speaking, similar to what I'm saying, and obviously, different. I'm learning from her. So it was lovely to hear it from another country. And I think she's hoping to come over at some stage, and I think we have even far better here, if you know what I mean. But it's fantastic to hear somebody appreciating what they've got. And from my memory, they wouldn't have the quantity or quality that we have.
Yes. Okay, well, look, we will draw to a close there. Thank you, Catherine, for your presentation today. Francis, thanks for helping out with the questions and also your work in organising the events for next week. And also I want to thank our Minister, Pippa Hackett, for opening today's session for us. It was great to get the Minister along. As I said, it really does underline the importance that hedgerows have in the Irish culture, and how important it is to the Irish government as well in terms of the funding side of things as well. And we will leave it at that. So until next week, we look forward to seeing you next Friday morning. Do check out those events. They're very clearly marked on the Teagasc homepage, on the Teagasc website, teagasc.ie. And we ask you to take care of yourselves, and we will see you next week. Thanks a lot.